Welcome back to Tales of Fantasy. Tonight we drift beyond the shoreline and into the vast, quiet depths of the ocean, a place where light fades slowly and the surface world becomes a distant memory. The sea has always held a powerful place in human imagination, not only as a source of life and mystery, but as a realm that feels almost entirely separate from our own. Beneath its shifting surface lies a world we can never fully reach, and for centuries people have wondered what might exist in those hidden depths. Among the many legends carried across the tides, few have endured as strongly or as widely as the stories of mermaids. These stories appear in cultures all over the world, from the cold northern seas to warm tropical waters, each version shaped by the people who lived beside the ocean. Yet, despite their differences, they share a common image, a being who is both human and something more, a creature whose life is divided between two worlds. Mermaids are often described as having the upper body of a human and the lower body of a fish, their long tails shimmering beneath the water as they move effortlessly through the sea. Their hair is often said to flow around them like strands of drifting kelp, and their voices, according to legend, carry a sound unlike anything that can be found on land. But the story of mermaids are not only about their appearance, they're about what mermaids represent. They are creatures of the ocean, and like the ocean itself, they are both beautiful and unknowable. In many of the oldest tales, mermaids were not gentle figures. Sailors spoke of hearing songs carried across the water on still nights, voices so haunting and melodic that they seemed to pull at something deeper within the listener. The songs were said to guide ships off course, drawing them toward hidden rocks or dangerous waters. Some believe these voices belonged to sirens, closely related to mermaids, whose purpose was to lure sailors to their fate. Others believed that mermaids themselves were responsible, not always out of cruelty, but because they existed according to rules entirely separate from human understanding. Over time, however, these stories began to change. As centuries passed, mermaids became to be seen not only as dangerous beings, but as mysterious and sometimes sorrowful ones. In many legends, they are portrayed as curious about the human world, drawn to the shore in quiet moments to watch from a distance. They sit upon rocks where the waves break softly, observing ships that pass along the horizon, or listening to sounds carried across the water from distant villages. There is often a sense in these stories that mermaids exist in a state of quiet separation, close enough to see the human world, yet unable to truly be a part of it. The idea becomes even more clear in the stories where mermaids attempt to cross that boundary. In some legends, a mermaid falls in love with a human, often a sailor or someone who lives near the sea. The connection begins at a distance, with brief glimpses or quiet encounters along the shoreline. Over time, that distance fades, and the mermaid begins to wish for something more. But becoming human is not simple. In many versions of the story, the mermaid must give up something in order to walk on land. Sometimes it is her voice, sometimes it is her connection to the sea, sometimes it is something less tangible, a part of her identity that cannot easily be regained. The transformation itself is often described as both beautiful and painful, a moment of change that allows her to step into the human world, but not without consequences. Even after she becomes human, there is often a quiet tension that remains. The sea is never far away. She hears it in the distance, sees it stretching endlessly beyond the shore, and feels its pull in ways she cannot fully explain. Though she may learn to walk among people, learn to speak, and to live within their world, something within her remains tied to the water. The tension between land and sea lies at the heart of many mermaid legends. These are stories not only about transformation, but about belonging, about the feeling of being caught between two worlds, never fully at home in either one. In other versions of the legend, mermaids never attempt to become human at all. Instead, they remain within the ocean, observing the surface world from afar. Sailors tell glimpses of movement beneath the water, of figures that appear briefly before disappearing into the depths. Some speak of calm encounters where a mermaid swims alongside the ship for a short time, her presence quiet and almost peaceful. Others tell of storms, where shapes move beneath the waves as the sea rises and falls, as though something beneath the surface is watching. In these stories, mermaids are not necessarily dangerous, but they are not entirely safe either. They are a part of the ocean, and the ocean itself cannot be controlled. There are also legends of entire mermaid kingdoms hidden far beneath the surface. Places untouched by sunlight, where coral structures rise like ancient cities, and currents move like unseen pathways through the dark. In these imagined worlds, mermaids lived complex lives, forming communities, guarding their territories, and passing down their own stories beneath the waves. These underwater realms are often described in quiet, dreamlike detail, filled with soft movement and distant light, a reflection of how humans imagine the unknown spaces of the ocean. Despite the many variations in these stories, certain themes appear again and again. One of the most enduring is the idea of longing. Mermaids often longed for the human world, just as humans have long been fascinated by the sea. This mutual curiosity creates a space where the two worlds almost seem to meet, yet never fully do. Another theme is transformation. The act of changing from one form to another, whether from sea to land or from human to something else, reflects a deeper question about identity and what it means to belong somewhere. And finally, there is a theme of distance. No matter how close these mermaids come to the human world, there is always a boundary that remains. The surface of the water itself becomes a kind of divide, a shifting line between what is known and what remains just out of reach. Perhaps this is why mermaid legends have lasted for so long. They are not only stories about creatures of the sea, but reflections of the human experience. The ocean, with its vastness and depth, represents both possibility and uncertainty. It invites exploration, yet resists understanding. It offers beauty, yet carries danger. Mermaids exist between that space. They're a way of imagining what might live beyond the limits of what we can see, a way of giving shape to the unknown. Even now, the ocean remains largely unexplored, and its deepest regions still hidden in darkness. Ships cross its surface, and people stand alongside its shores, looking out across the horizon, much as they always have. And sometimes, in quiet moments, when the water is calm and the sky stretches endlessly above it, it is not difficult to understand how these stories began. A movement beneath the surface, a distant shape in the waves, a sound carried across the water that cannot be quite explained. In those moments, the boundary between story and reality feels thinner, and the idea of mermaids, of beings who live just beyond our reach, becomes something more than imagination. it becomes a possibility, however distant. So if you ever find yourself standing at the edge of the sea, watching the tide as it moves slowly in and out, take a moment to listen to the waves, to the wind, to the quiet rhythm that has shaped these stories for generations. Because somewhere beneath that vast, shifting surface, the legend says that mermaids still swim, moving silently through the depths. Their song is carried softly through the water, waiting for those rare moments when the two worlds draw just a little closer together. Across cultures and coastlines, the legends of mermaids have taken many forms. Some say they are guardians of the sea. Others believe they are drawn to sailors in storms alike. Mermaids have lived in human stories for generations, symbols of mystery, beauty, and longing. Tonight we step into one of the most enduring tales ever told, not because it's the happiest, but because it is the most human. The original story of the Little Mermaid. Far out in the ocean, where the water is as blue as the prettiest cornflower and as clear as crystal, it is very, very deep. So deep indeed that no cable could fathom it. Many church steeples, piled one upon another, would not reach from the ground beneath to the surface of the water above. Down there dwells the Sea King and his subjects. We must not imagine that there is nothing at the bottom of the sea but bare yellow sand. No, indeed. The most singular flowers and plants grow there, whose leaves and stems are so flexible that the slightest agitation of the water causes them to stir as if they had life. Fishes, large and small, glide between the branches, just as birds fly among the trees here upon the land. In the deepest spot of all stands the Sea King's castle. Its walls are of coral, and the tall pointed windows are of the clearest amber. The roof is formed of shells that open and close as the water flows over them. Nothing can be more beautiful. In each lies a glittering pearl, and one of these would be a very valuable ornament in the crown of a queen. The Sea King has been a widower for many years, and his aged mother has kept house for him. She was a very wise woman, but exceedingly proud of her high birth. On that account she wore 12 oysters on her tail, while others of high rank were only allowed to wear 6. She was, however, very deserving of praise, especially for her care of the Sea King's 6 little daughters. They were all beautiful children, but the youngest was the prettiest of them all. Her skin was as clear and delicate as a rose leaf, and her eyes as blue as the deepest sea. But like all the others, she had no feet, and her body ended in a fish's tail. All day long they played in the great halls of the castle, or among the living flowers that grew out of the walls. The large amber windows were open, and the fish swam in just as swallows fly into our houses when we leave the doors open. The little mermaids had a beautiful garden, in which they might each like to cultivate their own flowers. They arranged them according to their own taste. Some liked whales, others like little fish, but the youngest made her garden round like the sun, and planted it with flowers as red as the rays at sunset. She was a strange child, quiet and thoughtful, while her sisters were gay and full of life. The mermaids were allowed to rise to the surface of the sea when they reached their 15th year. Then they were permitted to sit on the rocks in the moonlight and watch the great ship sailing by. They saw forests and cities, heard the bells ringing in the churches, and watched the people walking about. The youngest mermaid longed more than any of them to rise above the water and to see the world of human beings. At last, her 15th birthday arrived. "I know what you want," said her grandmother. "It is a great pleasure to rise above the sea, to sit upon the rocks and watch the ships, the forecasts, and the cities. But remember, you cannot remain there long." The little mermaid rose up through the water and lifted her head above the surface. The sun had just set, but the clouds still glowed like gold and roses. The air was mild and fresh, and the sea quite calm. A large ship lay near. Music and singing came from it, and as the evening darkened, 100 colored lanterns were lighted. The little mermaid swam closer through the windows of the cabin. There were many well-dressed people, but the most beautiful of them all was a young prince with large black eyes. He was celebrating his birthday, and everyone was rejoicing. The little mermaid could not take her eyes from him. Suddenly the sky became overcast. Lightning flashed, and a terrible storm arose. The waves rose like mountains and dashed against the ship. It rocked and creaked until at last it split in two. The little mermaid saw the prince sinking beneath the waves. She swam to him and held his head above the water. Then she carried him toward the shore, supporting him with all her strength. At last she reached the land and laid him on the sand near a temple. She kissed his forehead and left him there as people approached. The prince never knew who had saved him. From that moment, the little mermaid became sad and thoughtful. She longed to be human so she could be with him. She went to see the sea witch. "I know what you want," said the witch. "You want to become human and win the one love of the prince you love. I can help you, but it will cost you dearly." The witch explained that she would give the mermaid a potion. When she drank it, her tail would split into legs, but every step she took would feel like walking on sharp knives. "If you win the prince's love and he marries you," the sea witch said, "you will gain an immortal soul. But if he marries another, your heart will break and you will turn into sea foam." The little mermaid agreed. The witch cut out her tongue as payment, so she would never speak again. The mermaid drank the potion and fainted. When she awoke, she lay on the shore, and the prince stood before her. He took her into his palace. Though she could not speak, she danced more beautifully than anyone. The prince loved her, but only as a dear friend. He did not know she was the one that saved him. Soon, he was to be married to a princess from another kingdom. The little mermaid knew her fate was sealed. Her sisters rose from the sea and gave her a knife. "If you kill the prince and let his blood fall on your feet," they said, "you will become a mermaid and live again." The little mermaid looked at the prince as he slept beside his bride. She raised the knife, but she could not do it. She threw the knife into the sea and leapt into the water, expecting to dissolve into foam. But instead, she felt herself lifted into the air. She had become a daughter of the air. "Because you have suffered and remained good," the spirits told her, "you will earn an immortal soul through good deeds." And so the little mermaid rose above the waves, no longer bound to the sea, but on a new path towards eternity.